here's another way to explain that. I was thinking of this last night. Let's say you want to find out how many feet there are, like walking feet, like at the end of your legs in Florida, right? So you can go through the whole state and count everybody's feet. And there's 3,000 feet or whatever. Now you want to know how many, so then you say, okay, I don't want to count everybody's feet. So I'm going to say every person who has a foot has a shoe. And every shoe has a shoelace. So I'm not going to count the feet. I'm going to count the shoelaces because that's easier. Yeah. And that's going to tell me how many feet there are. And that's true, except some people have feet, but they don't have shoes. And some people have feet, but they have 3 pairs of shoes. And some shoes don't have shoelaces. So in that situation, you cannot use the shoelace argument to say how many people have feet or how many feet there are. And the guy who invented the test they're using with coronavirus, called a RT-PCR test, said, unless you have a gold standard like the meningococcus, you cannot use this for diagnostic purposes. It's a surrogate test.
Yes.
But the people who have, quote, coronavirus, they have a fever and a cough. So that could be anything.
Yes.
They haven't isolated the virus. And some of the people who have fever and a cough have a virus. Some of the people who have the virus have nothing. And so you can't make any prediction as to whether looking for a piece that's supposedly unique to the virus has any comment on whether they're actually sick from that. But the really scary part of this is the way the test is done. They take a piece that's supposedly unique to that virus and they accentuate it through cycles, 20 cycles, 40 cycles, because they can't find it just with one. And if you get it up to 60 cycles, you find it with everybody. So it's not unique to that virus.
No.
So, but if you do it 35 cycles, then you don't find it with anybody. So you can actually, by choosing the number of cycles, you can choose how many people will test positive.
Right, and would you agree that even if you find the virus present in any human or any human with a set of symptoms like fever or respiratory distress, it doesn't prove causality.
No, it could be an excretion of the cell.
Right, there could be excretion of the cell. There's an infinite number of factors that go into producing a symptom in a specific individual. So this whole model is really absurd on a really basic level.
Right.
Right.
And when you do that, and when you don't know whether it's the causative agent, or maybe there is no such thing in that context as a causative agent, maybe it's just a message, you can't use a surrogate marker in that case. And the problem then, if the false positive rate, if you do 40 cycles, is 1%, and you go test 20 million people, next thing you know, you have 200,000 people test positive, and you've got an epidemic.
Right. Well, what David Crow did in his recent article on Is Coronavirus 19 Real is show that originally in China, they were using criteria such as possible exposure to someone who had been diagnosed with the infection as a way to confirm a case. But when they started quarantining and there weren't more cases to associate with, the numbers just went down to, just basically dropped off the cliff. So it's all been through, just completely non-evidence-based criteria that they've been identifying, and the virome and metagenomic studies of just the human guts and even the blood are showing that many of these deadly viruses, so to speak, like flu and coronavirus and herpes viruses, are actually naturally present. They're part of our fundamental makeup, and therefore this concept, I was going to write this article about how should we be concerned about a weaponized germ? Because I think there's legitimate history to show that, yes, there are these secure facilities that ostensibly to protect against biowarfare have developed these strains. But I think it's more weaponized germ theory that we are most concerned about as a geopolitical control system, because of what we're seeing already with forced quarantines. I mean, we're looking at now Spain and France and Italy, and potentially soon the US will be on house arrest with the National Guard outside with guns. And that's really something that I think people need to understand, that this isn't just an academic discussion. Actually, when you really look down into this, like we are doing with these testing methodologies, there's very little evidence there at all that they work.
Yeah, and you can manipulate the numbers to get more false positives, and then you have an epidemic, and then you can give people a vaccine, and then you can lower the numbers, and then see you got rid of the epidemic, and all you did was change the number of cycles that you went through, and you'll change the numbers.
Absolutely.
You know, when I explain this to people, at least my view, I try to give people an imagination of this. And the two that I came up with is, because we're talking about, there are people who are getting sick, and they do have degenerative cells, right? Their cells are degenerating, and they're showing more DNA than they probably should, pooping out of their cells, right? The question then is, what's poisoning them?
Well, this is such an important point you're making, because when you look at, for example, conventional, standard of care for things like influenza, they're using Tamiflu.